Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, coming at you live to talk about Episode 3 of Star Trek Discovery, Context is for Kings. And this is going to be a spoilery discussion about this episode, not too in-depth, but if you haven't seen the episode already, I highly recommend that you click off this video and go check it out and then come back, because I'm going to be discussing some of the aspects of what we've seen in this spoilery, as it were. And from right out of the gate, one thing that I got to say about the title, Context is for Kings, it really reminded me of the TOS episode, The Conscience of the King, which itself was a Shakespeare reference, but just there are certain parallels that are on display in this episode. Arguably, I felt, especially with the debut of the Discovery finally, itself, as well as Captain Gabriel Lorca, the commanding officer of the Discovery, who is very enigmatic, and there's a lot of strangeness going on. So the Conscience of the King, it is weighing very heavily, I think, on Michael Burnham's mind, being introduced to this captain who is such a mystery, and you don't quite know what he's about, and we're very much taking the baby steps of figuring out what's going on aboard this vessel. It's just really intriguing, and I think you can make those parallels to The Conscience of the King as a title, as what that title signifies in that, because this is wartime now. There's a proper war unfolding between the Federation and the Klingons, and I really kind of liked the opening of the episode where Michael Burnham is being transported via shuttle from one penal colony to another, I think, and there are some other, criminals aboard. One of them killed a couple of Andorians. The chick on board doesn't like Andorians, and they're in sort of this ion storm or something in space, and the pilot of the shuttle is ordered to go out and take care of these, eradicate these, bio creatures that are trying to siphon out the electricity of the shuttle. And the pilot gets lost in the storm, and so havoc is ensuing. Everyone feels like they're going to die. All of the other, criminals aboard are trying to get their arms free of the, the locks, the braces that are on them. And Michael Burnham is sitting there completely stoic, calm, like it's just another peaceful, calm environment. Has no problem with potentially dying in the next few seconds. Like she's almost wearing a grin that signifies, like, well, if that's what happens, that's what happens, She doesn't really care. And so suddenly we see this tractor beam take hold of the shuttle, pull it out of the storm, and this is the first debut visually we have of the Discovery itself, and it is quite majestic, I have to say. It looks beautiful. The shot they chose from the underside reverse that's pulling the shuttle up into the shuttle bay and everything like that, and it looked spectacular. And I liked what followed after that, after the chief of security brings them to the mess hall, and everyone knows who Michael Burnham is by reputation, as well as recognizing her face. She's the first mutineer in the history of Starfleet. Nobody wants anything to do with her. She runs into one of the command crew of the Shenzhou and everything like that. Saru is actually aboard the Discovery as well. We see him later. He is the first officer of the ship, the number one. And but in the mess hall, everyone's eagle-eyeing her and scrutinizing Michael Burnham, and so she has but to sit down with the other criminals, because that's the only choice she has. And they had discussed earlier aboard the shuttle, you don't know who that is, that's Michael Burnham. So many people died in that opening two-parter. The Europa was completely lost, and so many people on the Shenzhou had died, and all the other ships, all the other vessels that came under the Klingon attack. So why don't we make it one more? And they attack Michael Burnham, and she unleashes this Vulcan martial arts on two of the three of them, and completely lays them waste, lays them out. And I thought it was really cool that the mess hall itself, if you looked at the seating, the chairs in the whole mess hall, they kind of harkened back to the 60s era. They looked like, plastic, and the metal legs underneath and everything. And so I think that was probably a purposeful callback, for all of the lack of the visuals that are actually callbacks. This is supposed to be 10 years before TOS, Kirk taking over the Enterprise from Captain Pike. And so there's a lot of really advanced looking technology, and we kind of find out why in this story, because Discovery is a science vessel. Right off the manufacturing line, it's something one of the criminals says as soon as they come aboard. And everything is brand new and fresh. And what I've learned, I have yet to pick it up, but the tie-in novel Desperate Hours by David Mack actually goes on to explain that Starfleet has a lot of different kinds of, ships of the line really active at the same time. So while the Discovery looks very futuristic and very advanced and is very top secret, according to the dialogue, Lorca gets a message later in the episode that says, this is top secret, and they're very protective of what experimentations are going on aboard the ship and everything like that. But so a ship like Discovery is going to be something that is only known to very few, but it still coexists with the NCC-1701 as commanded by Captain Pike and the number one of the day, and Spock being a science officer aboard and everything like that. So they do coexist in the Prime timeline, but this is a far more advanced vessel, and we see why through the course of this episode. There's some discussion about, considering biology and physics as separate entities, but at the quantum level they are, for all intents and purposes, the same. And so they're dealing with this experimentation of these kinds of spores, which, according to like the captain, can make these spacefaring vessels warp in seconds to from where they are now to the Beta Quadrant, for example, or even using it as an extension of like a transportation device, a transporter. Burnham is at one point put into this glass and tube encasement, and they put these spores inside, and suddenly she's seeing visions of, standing on Romulus, standing on Vulcan, standing on Earth, and all these different places that are so far spread in the quadrant of space that they're in. And in the blink of an eye, she could be there, and then she could be back again. She could be back home like nothing ever happened, as the captain says. And the idea of the biology of that kind of reminded me calling back on Star Trek Voyager, the bioneural gel packs, which were something that powered the ship and helped the warp and everything like that. And I think this, though, is a completely different beast, a completely different animal. And so there is some trepidation on my part that, wow, this is something that was going on coinciding with the TOS era, where they still had, you pulled apart any part of the bridge, and there were all these little like radio components and things like that, and chips and everything. Like, all right, if that's supposed to be at the same time, whatever you say. So I'm hoping down the line we will get a little more further examination of how all of this can coexist. And I thought it was actually kind of interesting too to learn that the Discovery actually had a sister ship, the USS Glenn, and they were conducting similar experiments, but all hands ended up being lost. And the ship was later found by Klingons, and there was something aboard the ship that was running amok and had killed the Klingons, all but one. And as the sort of landing party goes over, or the the party from Discovery, in any case, going over to investigate, investigative party, I guess you could say. They go over and they run into this Klingon, and they come under the attack of this giant creature. Who knows what in the hell it is. But every human being aboard had been scrunched up, as an effect of whatever testing they were doing. And so all hands were lost, as I say. And even the Klingons themselves had been attacked by whatever this creature is, run amok. And it was kind of strange that, I was reminded of things going back to Enterprise. There were a couple of episodes, like one of the earliest ones, Fight or Flight, I think it was called, and I think there was one called Future Tense, where they're prowling around the ship, and the ship has been, boarded by an alien species, and they've kidnapped one or two people, I think, if I remember correctly. And so, the vibe of the episode was suddenly becoming almost horror-esque in that effect, where, in the earlier episode I mentioned from Enterprise, they found a vessel dead-legged in space, and all the people aboard had been killed, and they were hooked up to these, blood siphoning machines or something like that. Something internally to this alien species' bodies was being siphoned out purposefully by another alien species. And so, there were elements of that were coming to the fore memory-wise for me watching this episode, and I just thought it was really stark in contrast. It was much more closely approaching Star Trek proper in the opening, and then all of a sudden it took on this horror vibe where they're, again, this investigative party Michael Burnham is a part of, and the chief engineer or whatever, science officer, is there as well, chief of security is there as well. And it's suddenly really horrific. They're prowling around this completely cold, dead USS Glenn. It's all dark. There's, sparks firing left, right, and center. And this creature is growling and running around in the background. And it was kind of weird, I couldn't really wrap my mind around it in the moment. And then once everything was said and done, it was really intriguing to find that the captain of the Discovery, Lorca, he has sort of a very intriguing quirk that he's studying all of these different kinds of creatures. You saw like a tribble on his desk whenever he'd had Michael Burnham in and was questioning her or directing her, giving her directives, issuing her orders to be, part of this crew and such like that. And later on we see that they've captured this creature that was run amok on the USS Glenn, the Discovery's sister ship, which they subsequently destroyed because all of the technology and information could not be allowed to get in the hands of any passersby, especially the Klingons, being that this is wartime, because that would give them the leg up if they knew what to do with the technology, which, stands to question, at least for me. But so they had pirated some of, the experimental information and technologies that were left behind on the Glenn before destroying the vessel, as well as the creature, as I say, and all about, the captain's personal quarters or whatever it is. You see these other little creatures. There's a little creature on a desk that almost looks like it's probably dead, but it kind of looked like from the episode of TOS, The Enemy Within, where you had like this little dog that had sort of spikes down its back like a lizard. It kind of looked like that to my eye. It was very fleeting. I didn't, pause the episode at all to try to get a better look at it. But little references like that, hearing the tribble noises and seeing the tribble and such like that. Whenever they're scanning using tricorders or the medical tricorders, you hear the same kind of TOS sound effects. And so that was immersive to me. That was really good to me. Probably one of the things that was detrimental to me was I really didn't like much of the characters that were being debuted. Lorca himself I found to be enigmatic, mysterious, and that attracts me to him as a character. I want to know more about what makes him tick, what's going on exactly with this guy. The way he wants Burnham, she initially thinks, well, he wants somebody who can play against the rules and is willing to go outside of the box and commit crimes and all this stuff, go against what the fundamentals of Starfleet and the Federation are, what that amounts to. Whereas he later says in the episode that it's more her honorability, the fact that she would go against the rules, making a pseudo-right choice, even though it ended in disaster, in her case, losing the Shenzhou, the Europa, and all these other ships. But she was willing to break the rules for the morals and the values she held within, and that was something that applied back to, of course, Starfleet and the Federation, as I say. Those similar values and the things that are held in very high regard to the Federation. And so there was a level of, Section 31 vibe that I was getting as well, because they always claimed to be very much about the scrutinizing the base fundamentals of the Federation, peace and exploration and all this stuff, but they would always take the advantageous route in accomplishing that, even if that meant breaking rules, losing lives, losing people, whatever it took, was what they would put into effect to accomplish their goals. So it feels almost very Section 31E, the Discovery, whatever it is they're experimenting on. We've only seen some small samples of that so far. And so it's all kinds of intriguing, but like other than the captain and Michael Burnham, and arguably even with Burnham, I mean, I'm not saying any of these characters are necessarily likable, but I find them compelling. With the exception of the two other main cast that are in the episode, you have this chick Tilly, who is, going to be the co-inhabitant in Michael Burnham's quarters, and she just kind of was annoying to me. She's very talkative, very nervous, and she snores and stuff. And so I didn't warm to her at all. I was just like, oh my God, shut up. Please stop talking. I'm only watching the show. I'm not even in the room with you, and stop talking. As well as Stamets, the scientific, engineer guy or whatever like that. He came across as being very much of a dick. I mean, he's even name calling. Burnham. He's using all these little stupid names for her and whatever like that. Lurker. Oh, she was lurking on the private message he was having back and forth with his friend on the Glen before the Glen got destroyed and all this stuff. And so it's just very childish and stupid. And so these two characters were largely unlikable. And we're supposed to be warming to this crew in some fashion. One of the only characters that still, stood out to me carrying over from the first two episodes was, as I say, Michael Burnham and Saru, who is now the commanding officer, the first officer on the Discovery. And I like him still, although it was weird. He seemed to be a lot taller now. Like, I know it's supposed to be 6 months later, but did he have a growth spurt or something? He seems to be towering much higher over Burnham in this episode than he did in the first two episodes, at least to my estimation. But I liked his interactions with Burnham, not quite being able to trust her, but still having an admiration for the skills she brought to the table. He did equate her as being the smartest Starfleet officer he's ever worked with, which is arguable. If you've seen the first two episodes, everything she did, she was very much kind of a fish out of water. I think what they really should have done is made that window of time she was aboard the Shenzhou lesser. Like the idea of her being aboard that ship for 7 years and then making the kinds of impetuous mistakes that she did just quite wasn't sold on me, even though I enjoyed it. Like, in scrutinizing that fact that she's supposed to have been aboard the Shenzhou for so long. And then she's making these very impetuous mistakes, as I say. It just, so many people died because of her actions and such. So I don't exactly know where he's coming from, where Saru's coming from, saying this is the smartest person I know. As long as she's not emotional, she's I guess good in a bind, good in a fix. But so that's really what I was left with. I mean, other than Lorca, Michael Burnham, and Saru, which I find compelling to varying degrees and intriguing and mysterious, and I want to get to know more about them. The other characters, the other sort of main characters, again, Ensign Tilly or whatever she was, that was the co-inhabitant of Burnham's quarters, as well as this Stamets guy. They just didn't rub me the right way. But I will say, a lot of the feeling, the vibe, the look, and the aesthetics, the story aesthetics, the components that make up what Discovery is supposed to be, this science vessel, very advanced, very new off the production block, really kind of reminded me of the Star Trek Corps of Engineers stories, which was conceived by Keith R.A. DiCandido and John Ordover, and has had subsequent authors writing short stories within that framework. Dayton Ward, Kevin Dillmore, David Mack being some of the ones I'm mostly familiar with, Michael A. Martin and such like that. Very, sort of in the Renaissance, in the current day, these pioneers of Trek literature, following on from the series proper and everything like that, in all different eras, going from TOS to TNG, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, and even beyond. There are a couple of trilogies, novel trilogies set beyond like Nemesis and such like that are very compelling and have just, that's where I've gotten my Star Trek fix for a lack of a series being out and the time in between the movies and such like that, which are arguable, true blood, air quotes, Star Trek. So, I mean, by and large, to sort of bring it all back into a nutshell, I enjoyed this episode. Context is for Kings for the most part. There were still aspects of it that just felt alien, for lack of a better term, from what I traditionally understand as Star Trek. Whereas the first two episodes, it felt very Star Trek to me. But if you've ever read like the Corps of Engineers stories, there are elements of that carry over into how the characters are drawn out so far in Discovery, what the ship is about and everything like that. The very, very sort of prescient scientific aspect of it. And for that, it definitely keeps me, while it did make me trepidatious and it didn't feel quite like Star Trek proper, it still has me hopeful that we're growing and building toward that more and more. And we're going to see more of that as the story unfolds. So that's really all I have to say on episode 3. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below if you've seen it as well, what you thought of it, what your impressions were on it. I mean, I'm sure I'm going to hear this is not real Star Trek, and all the complaints, you know, the Trekkies and Trekkers and fanboys, the knee-jerk reacting, oh, this is abhorrent, this is the worst thing ever, it's definitely not Star Trek, it's anything but Star Trek. Whatever, pipe up with that if you have to, but I'm not going to engage you if you do. I want people who are actually giving the show a chance and trying to make sense of it, and having real, genuine emotional reactions to what the story is that they're doling out, what the characters are doing, and who these people are so far, as we've gotten to know them very little as yet. It's still something that can be highly intriguing to guess at where we're going next. And so yeah, you know, love it or hate it though, anything goes in the comments below. Just love having that discussion, that conversation. It's all about the topic of talk. And otherwise, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.